Hey everyone, thanks for clicking. My name is Peter, I'm 32 years old, and my own mother tried to steal my condo using my identity, all to give it to my golden child younger brother. It's a day that plays over and over in my head, a moment that split my life into a before and an after. Before I tell you about the explosive family meeting where I finally exposed every last lie with a secret inheritance my parents had hidden from me for nearly a decade, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in this. The sound that started it all wasn't the gentle chime of a doorbell. It was a harsh, metallic bang, the sound of a fist hitting my steel door. Bam, bam, bam. It was 8 a.m. on a Saturday. I had been up late the night before, poring over architectural drafts for a potential client, a big one, and the noise ripped through the quiet of my apartment like a gunshot. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stumbled out of bed, my mind still thick with sleep, and padded toward the door. The banging came again, more frantic this time, accompanied by a voice I knew better than my own. Peter, open this door right now. Don't play games with me. It was my mother, Eleanor. Her voice wasn't its usual sweet, slightly controlling tone. This was different. It was sharp, jagged, filled with an anger I hadn't heard in years. I glanced at the small screen of my smart lock security camera. The fisheye lens showed 3 figures crowded on my doorstep. My mother, her face a mask of fury. My father, Richard, looking uncomfortable and avoiding the camera's gaze. And my younger brother, Leo, standing behind them with a smirk on his face, looking every bit the prince waiting for his castle doors to be opened. And in my mother's hand I saw it. A thick, manila folder. My blood ran cold. My hand hovered over the deadbolt. Just 3 weeks earlier, a single sentence at a restaurant had lit the fuse for this bomb, and now it was about to detonate on my front porch. I knew I couldn't just open the door. This wasn't a family visit. It was an invasion. With a shaking finger, I unlocked my phone, opened the camera app, and hit record. I took a deep breath, the air burning in my lungs. Then, I unlatched the deadbolt but kept the security chain engaged. The door opened a few inches, a narrow slice of the battlefield. My mother's face appeared in the gap, her eyes blazing. Finally, stop this nonsense. We're here to get the house ready for the appraiser. Behind her, Leo shifted his weight, impatient. Just open the door, man. I held my phone up, making sure the lens was visible. What are you talking about? There's no appraiser. Eleanor shoved the manila folder toward the gap. The corner of it hit the door chain with a metallic clink. Open the door. This is Leo's place, she yelled, her voice echoing in the hallway. Your brother needs you to sign these papers. Loan papers. I could see the bank's logo at the top. And my name. My name was printed right there. I held up my own set of papers, the mortgage statements I'd paid, a loan every single month for 8 years. I held them up right next to my phone's camera, a silent testament against their madness. But to understand how we got to this insane standoff, how I found myself filming my own family as they tried to seize my home, we have to go back. We have to go back to my father's birthday dinner 3 weeks before, the night the mask of our perfect family was finally, brutally, ripped away. The restaurant was called Carmela's, one of those ridiculously expensive Italian places my mother loved. The kind with white tablecloths so crisp they could cut you, and waiters who moved like ghosts. It was my father's 65th birthday, and the whole family was there. My parents, Richard and Eleanor. My younger brother, Leo, and his fiancée, Chloe. My Aunt Carol, my dad's sister, who was always my quiet ally. And me. The air was thick with the smell of garlic, money, and unspoken resentments. For most of the dinner, things were normal, which in my family meant a performance. We talked about the weather, my dad's golf game, Leo's latest brilliant but doomed business idea, a subscription box for artisanal dog toys. I talked about the new project I was trying to land with Julian Croft, a major real estate developer. My mother smiled and nodded, but her eyes glazed over whenever I mentioned my work. My career as an architect was stable, successful, but it wasn't flashy. It didn't sparkle like Leo's ever-shifting dreams. Then came the dessert, and with it, the toast. Eleanor stood up, tapping her wine glass with a manicured nail. The crystal rang out, silencing the table. "I'd like to make a toast," she began, beaming a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "To my wonderful husband, Richard, on his 65th birthday. We are all so blessed to have you." Everyone clapped politely. "And," she continued, her gaze shifting to my brother, "a toast to our son, Leo. He and Chloe are about to embark on an exciting new chapter. And to help them get started, we've decided it's time he finally gets the asset he deserves to secure a proper business loan." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I'd heard this kind of talk before. Usually, it meant my parents were about to sink another $10,000 into one of Leo's ventures. I took a sip of water, bracing myself. Aunt Carol shot me a questioning look from across the table. I just gave a slight shrug. Leo puffed out his chest, while Chloe preened beside him. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his voice slick with entitlement. "It's going to make all the difference." I forced a smile. "That's great, Leo. What asset are we talking about?" My mother turned her radiant, chilling smile on me. It was the smile she used right before delivering a killing blow. "The condo, silly," she said, her voice light and airy, as if she were talking about a piece of cake. The world seemed to slow down. The clinking of cutlery from other tables faded into a dull roar. I could feel the blood draining from my face. The condo?" I repeated, my own voice sounding distant and hollow. "My condo," she laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Peter, don't be so dramatic. You're just crashing there. It's always been for Leo. We were just letting you use it until he was ready to start his career and his family." I stared at her, speechless. Crashing there? I had found the condo. I had put down the deposit with what they called a family gift that they held over my head every chance they got. I had furnished it, and for 8 years, every single month, I had paid the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance. My salary, my hard work, had paid for that home. My home. I looked around the table. Leo was smirking, avoiding my eyes. His fiancée, Chloe, was practically glowing. My father was meticulously examining a crumb on the tablecloth, his classic move when he wanted to disappear. Only Aunt Carol looked horrified. Her mouth was slightly agape, her eyes wide with disbelief as she looked from Eleanor to me. The rest of them, they were smiling. They were all smiling, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. As if my life, my home, my security were just trivial details in the grand, glorious story of Leo Evans. In that moment, sitting in that suffocatingly fancy restaurant, I finally understood. I wasn't a son. I was a placeholder. I don't remember how I got through the rest of that dinner. I think I muttered something non-committal, a strangled sound that they took for agreement. I watched them cut the cake, their faces illuminated by the flickering candles, a perfect family portrait with one face, mine, erased. I felt like a ghost at my own funeral. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and shadows. The city I loved, the city I had chosen to build my life in, felt alien and hostile. Every traffic light felt like a judgment. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The slick, rehearsed cruelty of my mother's words echoed in my head. "You're just crashing there. It's always been for Leo." It wasn't just about the condo. It was never just about the condo. It was about everything. It was about the time I got a full scholarship to study architecture at a prestigious university out of state, and my mother cried for a week, guilt-tripping me about abandoning the family until I caved and went to a local college instead. A year later, they happily paid for Leo to go on a 6-month soul-searching trip to Southeast Asia after he dropped out of business school. It was about the time I won my first major design award, and my parents' only comment was to ask if the trophy was real silver, before changing the subject to a C+ Leo got on a pottery class midterm. My successes were minimized, my sacrifices expected. Leo's failures were romanticized, his whims funded. I was the responsible one, the reliable one. I was the family's workhorse. And Leo was the family's show pony. I pulled into my designated spot in the parking garage, the spot I paid $100 a month for. I looked up at the building, at the window of my apartment, my home, and I felt a surge of anger so pure and hot it almost made me dizzy. They had helped with the down payment 8 years ago. It was a substantial amount, and they never let me forget it. It wasn't a gift. It was a leash. "We gave you a start, Peter," my mother would say. "Don't forget who helped you get that roof over your head. They used it to control me, to demand my presence at every tedious family function, to justify asking for loans they never repaid. It was their investment in a future asset, an asset they had always intended for their real son, the golden one. I had been a fool, a blind, dutiful fool. I thought their conditional love was better than no love at all. I thought if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, I could finally earn the validation they gave Leo so freely. I turned off the engine, and the silence in the car was deafening. I sat there for a long time, the carefully constructed walls of my life crumbling around me. They thought they could just snap their fingers and I would hand over the keys, pack my bags, and disappear. They thought I was still that compliant boy who gave up his dream school to appease his mother. They were wrong. A new feeling was taking root in the pit of my stomach, pushing aside the hurt and the shock. It was cold, hard, and sharp-edged. It was resolve. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had pushed me too far. They had finally woken me up. And I would not be surrendering my home. I would not be surrendering my life. This was where the performance ended. This was where the fight began. The day after the disastrous birthday dinner, I woke up with a headache and a heavy heart. The morning light felt harsh, intrusive. My own home felt different, tainted. I kept expecting to see Leo walking down the hall, measuring for new furniture. I had to do something. I couldn't let my mother's declaration just hang in the air, solidifying into fact. My first thought was to call my dad. Richard had always been the more reasonable one, the peacekeeper, or so I had told myself. I thought if I could just get him alone, away from Eleanor's influence, I could make him see how insane this was. I called his cell. He answered on the third ring, his voice wary. "Peter, everything okay?" "No, Dad, not really. I need to talk to you about what Mom said last night. About the condo." There was a long pause. I could hear the television droning in the background. "Ah," he finally said. "Listen, son, your mother. She gets ideas in her head. She just wants what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "How is taking my home away from me and giving it to Leo best for everyone?" "It's best for Leo. That's it." "Now, don't take that tone," he said, his voice shifting into that familiar, placating drone he used whenever conflict arose. "It's not like you'd be on the street. You could move back home for a while, save some money." I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. "Move back home? I'm 32 years old, Dad. I have a career. I have a life. This is my home. I've paid the mortgage on it for 8 years. And we gave you the down payment," he countered, the words like a slap. It was always the first weapon they reached for, the chain they used to yank me back in line. "We helped you get on the property ladder. Leo needs a leg up now. He's trying to build a business, start a family with Chloe. You're established. It's your turn to help your brother." The sheer, staggering unfairness of it all stole my breath. My turn to help? I've been helping my whole life. By staying quiet, by not rocking the boat, by letting you both pour all your time, energy, and money into his black hole of a life while I figured things out on my own. This isn't helping. This is theft. "That's a very ugly word, Peter," he said, his voice cold now. "Your mother is very disappointed in your attitude. She thought you'd be happy to support your brother. This is tearing her apart." And there it was, the final checkmate move in their game of emotional chess. It was never about logic or fairness. It was about Eleanor's feelings, protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. I realized then, with a crushing certainty, that my father was not a neutral party. He was a willing accomplice. He wasn't a peacekeeper. He was an enabler. He would rather sacrifice his son's home and happiness than face one moment of his wife's displeasure. I'm not giving him my house, Dad, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. It's not going to happen. You think about what you're doing to this family, he said, and then he hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. I was completely and utterly alone in this. They were united against me. They really thought they could bully me into submission. I looked at the smart lock on my front door. An idea, cold and clear, formed in my mind. It was a small act, a digital one, but it was a declaration of war. I opened the app on my phone, went into the settings, and deleted their access codes. My mother's, my father's, and Leo's. With a few taps on a screen, I fortified my walls. They were no longer welcome here. The locks had been changed. Let them come. And that brings us back to the present. To me, standing at my door, the chain pulled taut, my phone recording, as my family stood on the other side, ready to tear my life apart. The hallway was quiet except for the sound of my own ragged breathing and the furious, indignant sputtering from the other side of the door. My mother's face was still pressed into the narrow opening, her skin blotchy with rage. "What is the meaning of this, Peter?" she hissed, rattling the door against the chain. "Why are you filming me? Put that phone down and let us in." "No," I said. The word felt powerful, solid. For years, my default answer had been yes or "I'll see what I can do." No was a foreign country I was just beginning to explore. "I'm not letting you in. And I'm filming this because I don't trust you." My father, who had been lingering in the background, finally stepped forward. "Son, let's not make a scene. Your mother is upset. Just open the door and we can talk this out like a family." "We're past talking, Dad," I said, my gaze unwavering. "You made that clear on the phone. This isn't a discussion. It's an ambush." I held up the bundle of mortgage statements in my other hand, making sure they were clearly in view of my phone's camera. "This is my house. These are my payments. You have no right to be here." Leo, who had been silent until now, pushed past my father. His face, usually so charming and carefree, was twisted into an ugly sneer. "Are you serious right now? After everything Mom and Dad did for you? They gave you this place, and now you're being a selfish jerk about it. They gave me a down payment, Leo, a loan, apparently, that I'm now expected to repay by forfeiting the entire property to you. That's not how it works." My mother shoved the manila folder through the gap again. "Sign the HELIC application, Peter. The appraiser is coming on Monday. Do you want to ruin your brother's chances? Do you want to be the one who destroys his future?" HELIC, home equity line of credit. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying snap. They weren't just trying to emotionally blackmail me into giving up the condo. They had already taken steps. They had applied for a loan against my property, in my name, for Leo's benefit. This was a whole new level of betrayal. It wasn't just manipulative anymore. It was illegal. The anger that had been simmering inside me for weeks finally boiled over. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was defending myself from a crime. "Get away from my door," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "The discussion is over. This is not your house. It is not Leo's house. It is my house. And you are not welcome here." Eleanor's eyes widened in disbelief. She had never been spoken to like this before, especially not by me. "You will regret this, Peter. I promise you. The only thing I regret," I said, looking each of them in the eye, "is not doing this sooner." And with that, I slammed the door shut. The sound was like a cannon blast in the enclosed hallway. I immediately threw the deadbolt. The final, heavy clunk echoed the closing of a chapter in my life. I leaned my back against the door, my legs trembling. I could hear my mother screaming on the other side, a torrent of threats and insults. Leo was kicking the door, his frustration boiling over. My father was trying to calm them down, his voice a useless murmur against their rage. I slid down to the floor, my phone still clutched in my hand, the recording light still on. The sounds from the hallway eventually faded as they retreated in defeat. The silence they left behind was vast and terrifying. And in that silence, I finally let myself break. The tears I had been holding back since that dinner party finally came, hot and bitter. They weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of fury, of betrayal, and of a strange, terrifying freedom. The war had officially begun. The weekend passed in a haze of anxiety and adrenaline. I barely slept. Every creak in the building, every footstep in the hall, sent a jolt of panic through me. I half expected them to return with a locksmith. I saved the video from the confrontation to my computer, my cloud storage, and a separate hard drive. It was my first piece of concrete evidence. By Monday, a fragile sense of calm had returned. They hadn't come back. Maybe, just maybe, my stand had worked. Maybe they had realized they couldn't just steamroll me. I tried to focus on work, immersing myself in the plans for the Croft project. It was my escape, a world of clean lines and logical solutions, a stark contrast to the messy, irrational chaos of my family. Then, on Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was innocuous. "Thank you for your application." The sender was First National Bank, the same bank that held my mortgage. I frowned, thinking it was just a marketing email. I was about to delete it when the first sentence caught my eye. "Dear Peter Evans, thank you for submitting your application for a home equity line of credit. A loan officer will be in contact with you within 3 to 5 business days to discuss the next steps, including scheduling a property appraisal." I read the sentence again and again. My heart started to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. HELIC application, property appraisal. My mother's words from the doorway came rushing back. "Sign the HELIC application. The appraiser is coming on Monday." This couldn't be real. They wouldn't. They couldn't have actually. My hands were shaking as I navigated to my credit monitoring app. I logged in, my breath held tight in my chest, and there it was under recent activity. A hard inquiry on my credit report from 5 days ago. The source, First National Bank. The air left my lungs in a whoosh. I felt dizzy, sick to my stomach. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plan they were trying to bully me into. They had already done it. My mother had taken my personal information, my social security number, my date of birth, my address, and had used it to apply for a massive loan against the equity I had spent 8 years building in my own home. She had forged my signature. She had committed identity theft. Felony. I stood up from my desk and had to brace myself against the wall. The room was spinning. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was like a physical blow. This went beyond family drama, beyond favoritism, beyond emotional manipulation. This was a calculated criminal act. She was willing to ruin my financial future, saddle me with debt, and risk my home, all to hand the proceeds to my brother so he could launch another doomed business venture. The manila folder she'd been waving in my face. It was a completed application. They hadn't come for a signature. They had come to inform me of the final steps of a fraud they had already perpetrated. I thought back to all the times she'd asked for my help with paperwork, claiming she was bad with computers. Had she seen my social security number on tax forms? Had she memorized it? The premeditation of it all was staggering. I stumbled into the kitchen and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The person staring back was a stranger, his face pale with shock. My own mother. My own mother had done this to me. For a moment, all I felt was a deep, gut-wrenching despair. How do you fight your own family when they're willing to cross a line like that? But then, the despair began to curdle, hardening back into that cold, sharp anger. They thought I would just lie down and take it. They had underestimated me for the last time. This wasn't just about my condo anymore. This was about my name, my future, my very identity. And I would not let them steal it. I picked up my phone, my fingers surprisingly steady, as I Googled the number for the fraud department at First National Bank. The time for being a dutiful son was over. It was time to report a crime. The phone rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. First National Bank, Fraud and Identity Theft Prevention. My name is Sarah. How can I help you? For a second, the words caught in my throat. It felt like a monumental betrayal to voice this accusation to a stranger, to make it real. It was one thing to know what my mother had done. It was another to say it out loud, to put it on an official record. But the image of her furious face at my door, the memory of that fraudulent email, pushed me forward. "Hello, Sarah." I managed, my voice hoarse. "My name is Peter Evans. I believe I'm the victim of identity theft. I received an email about a HELIC application that I never submitted." "I'm very sorry to hear that, Mr. Evans," she said, her tone empathetic but all business. "I can certainly help you with that. Can you please confirm your full name and the last 4 digits of your social security number so I can pull up your file?" I gave her the information, my stomach churning. As she typed, I could hear the quiet clicking of her keyboard, a sound that seemed to be sealing my family's fate. "Okay, I see it here," she said after a moment. "An application for a home equity line of credit, submitted online 5 days ago. Can you confirm that you did not authorize this application?" "That's correct," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I did not authorize it. I had no knowledge of it until I received an automated email today." "I understand," she said. "Mr. Evans, for our records, we need to know if you have any idea who might have accessed your personal information to submit this application. It can be a difficult question, but it's a necessary one." This was it, the point of no return. I took a deep breath. The truth felt like ash in my mouth. "Yes," I said, the word heavy and final. "I know exactly who did it. It was my mother, Eleanor Evans." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line. I'm sure she'd heard it all in her line of work, but the rawness in my voice must have been evident. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Evans," she said, her professional calm returning. "I know that isn't easy to say. We will immediately cancel this application and flag it as fraudulent. No funds have been dispersed, and this will not proceed any further. I also strongly recommend that we place a fraud alert and a freeze on your credit report immediately. This will prevent any new lines of credit from being opened in your name without your express permission." "Yes," I said immediately. "Please, do that right away." She walked me through the process, her voice a steady guide in the chaos of my emotions. We put a freeze on all 3 major credit bureaus. She assured me that the hard inquiry from their bank would be removed from my record. She gave me a case number and her direct extension. "Mr. Evans," she said, just before we hung up, "you may also want to consider filing a police report. With a family member involved, I know that's a very complicated decision, but identity theft is a serious crime." "I understand," I said. "Thank you, Sarah. You've been a huge help." After I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the case number I'd scribbled on a notepad. A police report. Could I actually do that? Could I have my own mother arrested? The thought was nauseating. But what was the alternative? Let her get away with it? Let them think they could commit a felony against me with no consequences? A new wave of messages suddenly buzzed on my phone. It was my mother. "Peter, I'm arranging for an appraiser to come by on Thursday. Please be available." Followed by another, "Don't ignore me. This is for the family." The audacity was breathtaking. Even after I had slammed the door in her face, she was still pushing, still lying, pretending this was a normal transaction. She had no idea I knew the truth. She had no idea I had just dismantled her entire scheme with a single phone call. The stage was set for our next confrontation, and this time I held all the cards. The next 2 days were a tense, silent war. I didn't respond to my mother's texts. I let her calls go to voicemail. I was building my fortress, and silence was my mortar. I knew the canceled HELIC application would eventually trigger an alert back to her, and I was waiting for the inevitable explosion. It came on Friday, not as a bang, but as an insidious whisper that grew into a roar. It started with a Facebook post from Leo. He didn't name me, of course. He was more clever than that. It was a long, rambling post, full of vague platitudes about how family is supposed to have your back, and how heartbreaking it is when the person you should be able to count on most turns out to be your biggest enemy. He wrote about his dreams of starting a business being crushed by a cold, selfish act of betrayal. He ended it with a hashtag family disappointment. The comments section was a predictable flood of sympathy. "Oh, Leo, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Stay strong. Whoever did this to you is a monster. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins." They all chimed in with heart emojis and words of support for poor, victimized Leo. None of them called me. None of them asked for my side of the story. I had been tried and convicted in the court of social media. The digital assault didn't stop there. By Saturday morning, the Google rating for my small architectural firm, which I had painstakingly built up to a solid 4.9 stars, had plummeted. A dozen one-star reviews appeared overnight. They were all anonymous, all vague, but the language was eerily similar. Unreliable. Completely untrustworthy. Do not do business with this man. He has serious personal issues that affect his work. Avoid. My stomach twisted into a knot. This was their next move. If they couldn't steal my home, they would try to destroy my livelihood. They were trying to ruin my reputation, the one thing an architect cannot afford to lose. The first real casualty came on Monday. I got a call from a longtime client, a sweet older woman named Mrs. Henderson, for whom I was designing a small sunroom addition. "Peter," she said, her voice hesitant. "I'm so sorry, but I think we need to put a pause on the project." "Oh," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Henderson?" "Well, yes, dear, it's just, I was talking to my niece at my book club and she knows your cousin, and, well, I heard about the trouble you're having with your family. It sounds very messy, and I just don't think I can be involved in all that drama." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Mrs. Henderson, I can assure you my personal life has no bearing on my professional work." "I'm sure it doesn't, dear," she said, though her tone said otherwise. "But it's best if we just wait until the dust settles. I'll call you." She wouldn't call. I knew it. I had just lost a client because of their lies. I spent the rest of the day taking screenshots. Every Facebook post, every comment, every fake review. I documented everything, saving it all into a folder on my computer labeled Evidence. That evening, as I was staring blankly at my screen, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Carol. Her voice was a balm on my raw nerves. "Peter? I just saw Leo's post. Don't listen to a word of it. I know what Eleanor is capable of. Are you okay?" For the first time in weeks, I felt a crack in my armor of anger. "I'm trying to be," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "They're bullies, Peter," she said, her voice fierce. "They've been bullying you your whole life. Don't you let them win. You document everything, you hear me? You fight back." Her words were the lifeline I desperately needed. She believed me. She saw the truth. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the villain. Her call solidified my resolve. They wanted a war? I would give them one. But I wouldn't fight it with their weapons of lies and slander. I would fight it with the one thing they couldn't manipulate, the cold, hard truth. In the midst of the chaos, feeling isolated and under siege, I made a mistake. I reached out to someone I thought I could trust. My cousin, Daniel. He was a few years older than me, a financial advisor, and we'd always been close. I thought he, of all people, would offer some sober, logical advice. I called him and laid out the whole story, the dinner, the confrontation, the Hellick fraud, the smear campaign. I left nothing out. He listened patiently, making sympathetic noises at all the right moments. "Man, that is rough," he said when I finished. "Just unbelievable. I can't believe Aunt Eleanor would go that far." "I know," I said, relieved to have another ally. "I just don't know what to do next. I've canceled the loan application, but now they're trying to ruin my business." "Okay, listen," he said, his voice dropping into its professional advisory tone. "You need to think strategically here. Going to war with your whole family. It's a messy business, Peter. You're an architect. Your reputation is everything. Do you really want clients Googling you and finding a bunch of family drama? Or worse, a lawsuit? What are you suggesting?" I asked. "I think you need to de-escalate," he said. "Be the bigger person. Call your mom. Hear her out. Maybe you can compromise." Offer to help Leo out in a different way, a way that doesn't involve you losing your condo. If you just make a small gesture of peace, this whole thing could blow over. It's better than burning everything to the ground. His advice felt off. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but it echoed the same old family script. Peter needs to be the one to bend. Peter needs to manage his mother's feelings. Peter needs to sacrifice for the good of the family. I don't think you understand, Daniel, I said slowly. She committed a felony. An alleged felony, he corrected quickly. And one you'd have a hard time proving without draining your savings on a lawyer. Is it worth it? Just think about the long game here. Then he said the thing that made a cold alarm bell go off in my head. Besides, she was probably just trying to get the loan application pre-approved to save time. It's not like she spent the money. My blood froze. I had never told him the loan was for a pre-approval process. I had just said it was an application. That was a detail only my mother and the bank would know. How did Daniel know that? In that split second, the terrible truth dawned on me. He wasn't my ally. He was a spy. My mother had gotten to him. He was feeding me advice designed to disarm me, to get me to stand down. The feeling of betrayal was so profound it left me breathless. I was surrounded by enemies, even where I least expected it. You know what, Daniel? I said, my voice ice cold. That's some interesting advice. I'll think about it. I hung up the phone before he could reply. The board was set. The players were in position. And I finally knew who I could trust. Absolutely no one but myself. A week after my conversation with Daniel, the call I had been waiting for finally came. It was my father. His voice was strained, devoid of its usual false heartiness. Peter, he said, getting straight to the point, we need to sort this out. All of us. This has gone on long enough. Oh, has it? I replied, my voice flat. I was just getting used to the daily one-star reviews. He sighed, a long-suffering sound that used to trigger my guilt. Now it just made me angry. That's not helping. We're meeting tomorrow, 11 a.m., at your Aunt Carol's house. She's offered to mediate. Be there. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Aunt Carol. That was their strategic move. They knew she was the only one I trusted, so they were using her home as a neutral ground, a Trojan horse to get me to the negotiating table. They thought it would make me lower my guard. They were wrong. I'll be there, I said and hung up. The time for defense was over. It was time to go on the offensive. I didn't sleep that night. I was a general preparing for the final battle. I opened the evidence folder on my computer and got to work. I printed everything. The fraudulent HELIC application email from the bank. The screenshot of the hard inquiry on my credit report. Every single Facebook post from Leo and the ensuing comments from the family. Every fake one-star review of my business. I organized it all chronologically with dates and times. But that wasn't my secret weapon. That was just the opening salvo. My trump card was something else entirely. Years ago, after my maternal grandmother passed away, her estate had been handled by a small, local law firm. I was her favorite and we'd been very close. I had been devastated by her loss, and in my grief, I let my parents handle all the details of the funeral and the will. They had told me she'd left me a small sum, which they had generously decided to put toward the down payment on my condo. It was their narrative. Grandma left you some money, and we matched it to give you a home. Another chain, another debt they held over me. But a few days ago, haunted by my mother's willingness to commit fraud, a dark suspicion had taken root. I dug through my old files and found the name of the law firm. Called them. I explained who I was and asked if they still had the records from my grandmother's estate. The lawyer I spoke to, a kind, elderly man who remembered my grandmother fondly, pulled the file. And he told me the truth. My grandmother hadn't left me a small sum. She had set up a separate trust fund for me years before she died. The sole beneficiary was me. The amount in that trust was not only enough for the entire down payment on my condo. There had been a significant amount left over. My parents, as the executors, had been given access to it. They had used it for the down payment just as they'd said. But they had lied about the amount and they had kept the rest. The inheritance was entirely from my grandmother. Their contribution had been nothing but lies. The lawyer, sensing the gravity of the situation, had emailed me a copy of the official trust documents. Now I printed them out. Every page. I three-hole punched all my evidence and placed it into 3 identical, sleek, black binders. One for my parents, one for Leo, and one for me. The next morning, I put on a suit. Not for a client meeting, but for this. It was my armor. Before heading to Aunt Carol's, I made one last stop. I went to a small coffee shop near her house to collect my thoughts. As I was standing in line, the door opened, and in walked Julian Croft, the developer. The very man I was desperate to impress. He saw me and smiled. "Peter, good to see you. Still thinking about my project?" An idea, bold and terrifying, sparked in my mind. It was a huge risk, but the potential payoff was immeasurable. "Mr. Croft," I said, my voice steady. Actually, I was on my way to a complex family contract negotiation. It involves a property dispute. You're a man who understands contracts and assets. I know this is unorthodox, but would you be willing to sit in? Not to say a word, just to be an impartial observer. A witness. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and appraising. He saw the suit, the binder under my arm, the tension in my jaw. He was a shark who smelled blood in the water, and he was intrigued. A slow smile spread across his face. "Lead the way, Mr. Evans. This sounds far more interesting than my morning coffee." We walked out of the coffee shop together. I was no longer going into the lion's den alone. I was bringing a bigger lion with me. Aunt Carol's living room was arranged like a courtroom. My parents and Leo were on one couch, a united front. Aunt Carol sat in an armchair, her face a mask of neutrality, though her worried eyes kept flicking toward me. There was a single, empty chair facing them. The hot seat. When I walked in, followed by the imposing figure of Julian Croft, a wave of confusion rippled across the room. My father stood up, his hand outstretched. "Peter, and you are?" he asked, looking at Mr. Croft. "Julian Croft," he said, his voice deep and resonant, shaking my father's hand briefly. "Mr. Evans and I have a potential business matter to discuss. He invited me to observe. I trust that's not a problem." My mother's eyes narrowed. The presence of a powerful, wealthy stranger had thrown her off her game. This wasn't the private shaming she had planned. "No, of course not," she stammered. I didn't sit down. I walked to the coffee table and placed 2 of the black binders squarely in front of them. "I'm not here to negotiate," I said, my voice clear and ringing in the tense silence. "I'm here to inform you of the facts. Please open the binders." Hesitantly, my father opened one. Leo leaned over his shoulder. I watched their faces as they flipped through the first few pages. The screenshots of Leo's Facebook post. The 1-star reviews. My father flinched. Leo's smirk faltered. "This is petty, Peter," my mother snapped, refusing to look at the binder. "Airing dirty laundry." "I'm just getting started," I said calmly, flipping to the next section in my own binder. Page 12. The email from First National Bank, confirming receipt of a HELIC application in my name, which I never submitted. Page 13. The hard inquiry on my credit report. This is bank fraud. Identity theft. A felony. My father's face went pale. Leo looked genuinely shocked, turning to our mother. "Mom, you actually did it." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "I was trying to help you, to secure your future. Your brother is being selfish, holding on to an asset he doesn't need." "An asset I paid for," I countered, my voice rising. "But let's talk about that. Let's talk about the down payment. The family gift you've held over my head for 8 years." I turned to the final section of the binder. Page 24. This is where the real show began. This was my moment of truth. "This," I said, my voice shaking with the weight of it all, "is a copy of the trust document from Grandma's estate lawyer, the Eleanor M. Wallace Trust for the benefit of Peter Evans." The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My mother froze, her face turning a ghastly shade of white. It seems Grandma didn't leave me a small sum, I continued, my voice growing stronger with every word. She left me an inheritance, a substantial one, enough to cover the entire down payment and then some. An inheritance which you, Mom, and you, Dad, as executors of her will, were legally obligated to inform me about. But you didn't. You told me it was a gift from you. You hid the existence of this trust. You stole the remainder of the funds. And now, you've been trying to steal the very asset that her legacy provided for me. I looked directly at my father. You knew. You knew all along. Richard Evans, the man who spent his life avoiding conflict, finally broke. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. We were going to tell you, he whispered, his voice muffled. We thought it was for the best, to keep the money in the family. Leo looked utterly bewildered, as if the ground was splitting open beneath him. He was staring at our parents, not with anger, but with the dawning, horrified realization of a child who has just discovered his gods have feet of clay. But my focus was on my mother. She was staring at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The mask was gone. The powerful, controlling matriarch had vanished. In her place was just a woman, stripped bare of all her lies, exposed in the harsh light of the truth. I looked over at Julian Croft. He was leaning forward slightly, his expression unreadable but utterly captivated. He hadn't just witnessed a family squabble. He had witnessed the complete and total dismantling of a dynasty built on deceit. And in his world, information and character were everything. This was the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're amazing. Please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, so I know you've been on this journey with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of my journey. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating. My father was still hiding his face, a collapsed ruin of a man. Leo was pale, staring into the middle distance, processing the scale of the deception that had defined his entire life of privilege. My mother, however, was slowly reassembling herself. The shock was being replaced by a desperate, last-ditch attempt at control. Peter, she began, her voice raspy. We can fix this. It was a misunderstanding. A mistake. I held up a hand. No. No more words. I've heard enough words from you to last a lifetime. Now you're going to listen. I stepped forward, my shadow falling over the coffee table, over the binders filled with their treachery. I have consulted with a lawyer, I lied, though I knew the lawyer from my grandmother's estate would back me up in a heartbeat. I have enough evidence here for multiple criminal charges. Bank fraud, identity theft, mishandling of an inheritance trust. It would be a very long, very public, and very expensive legal battle. A battle you would lose. I let that sink in. I saw the flicker of fear in my mother's eyes. Public humiliation was her greatest terror. But I'm not going to do that, I continued, my voice cold as steel. Because unlike you, I don't find joy in destroying people, especially my own family. So here is my offer. It is not a negotiation. It is a statement of terms. I looked at each of them in turn, making sure I had their full attention. 1. You will cease all contact with me. No calls, no texts, no unannounced visits. You will remove every single fake review and all defamatory posts online within 24 hours. 2. You will never again mention my condo, my career, or my finances to anyone, ever. 3. We are done. The charade of this family, as it was, is over. Aunt Carol let out a soft gasp. My mother looked like I had physically struck her. You don't mean that, she whispered. I have never meant anything more in my life, I said. If you violate any of these terms, I will walk into a police station with a copy of this binder, and I will file a report. I will hand another copy to a litigation attorney. I will burn your world to the ground, and I will not lose a wink of sleep over it. Do you understand me? There were no tears, no shouting, just the cold, final weight of my words. My father looked up, his face streaked with tears. He just nodded numbly. Leo, looking lost, also gave a slight, jerky nod. My mother stared at me, her eyes filled with a venomous mix of hatred and defeat. She said nothing, which was an answer in itself. Good, I said. I turned to Aunt Carol. I'm sorry to have brought this into your home, Aunt Carol, but I needed a witness. You did what you had to do, Peter, she said, her voice filled with a sad pride. Then I turned to Julian Croft. I apologize for the unorthodox presentation, Mr. Croft. Thank you for your time. He stood up, his gaze sharp and assessing. No apology necessary, Mr. Evans. It was illuminating. He walked over to me and clapped a firm hand on my shoulder. Call my office on Monday. We'll talk about the project. It was the validation I had craved my entire life, not from my family, but from a man who respected strength and integrity. It was more than enough. I left the binders on the table, a permanent record of their sins. Then I walked out the door with my aunt beside me, and for the first time in my life I didn't look back. The weeks following the confrontation were strange and quiet. It was like living in the eerie calm after a hurricane has passed, with debris still scattered everywhere. True to my word, I blocked their numbers. The fake reviews disappeared within a day. Leo's self-pitying Facebook post was deleted. The digital war at least was over. But the real-world consequences lingered. My business had taken a serious hit. The rumors they had started had seeped into the community, and even without the negative reviews, a cloud of suspicion hung over my name. I lost another potential client, a small restaurant renovation. The reason given was vague, a change in direction, but I knew the truth. The poison they had injected was still working its way through the system. One evening, about a month later, I got an email from Aunt Carol. It was a link to an article in the local business journal. The headline read, "Artisanal Dog Toy Subscription Box, Positively Posh Folds Before Launch." The article detailed how Leo's brilliant startup had collapsed when its primary funding, a significant business loan, had inexplicably fallen through at the last minute. The company was bankrupt before it had sold a single box. I felt a grim, hollow satisfaction. He had built his dream on a foundation of lies and fraud, and it had crumbled just as it should have. Aunt Carol called me later that night. Chloe left him, she said, her voice flat. Packed her bags last week. Said she couldn't marry into a family with so much financial instability and drama. Turns out her loyalty was only as deep as Leo's promised bank account. The house of cards they had all built around Leo was collapsing, one card at a time. Still, my own future felt precarious. I was hemorrhaging money, and the prestigious Croft project felt more like a distant dream than a reality. I was starting to wonder if, in winning the battle, I was about to lose the war for my own career. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was Julian Croft's assistant. "Mr. Croft would like to see you, Mr. Evans. Are you available to come in at 2 p.m. today?" My heart leaped. Yes, of course. I'll be there. I spent the next few hours in a frenzy of preparation, my hands shaking as I gathered my presentation materials. When I walked into his corner office, with its panoramic view of the city, he didn't waste any time on small talk. He was sitting at his massive oak desk, and he gestured for me to sit. He looked me straight in the eye. "I saw what you did at your aunt's house, Mr. Evans. You were prepared, you were logical, and you were ruthless when you needed to be. You protected your asset. That's the kind of man I want building my flagship project." He pushed a thick contract across the desk. "The job is yours, if you want it." Tears welled in my eyes. It wasn't just about the contract. It wasn't just about the money or the promotion of my career. It was about being seen, truly seen, for my strength and integrity, after a lifetime of being overlooked. I picked up the pen. "I want it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. The storm was finally starting to pass. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of activity. The Croft project was all-consuming, a complex and challenging beast of a design that demanded all of my focus and creativity. It was exactly what I needed. It was a chance to pour all the energy I had once wasted on family drama into something constructive, something that would last. Working with Julian Croft was a revelation. He was demanding, exacting, but fair. He respected my vision and valued my input. For the first time, I was being judged solely on the merit of my work, not on who my brother was or how I fit into a dysfunctional family narrative. My confidence, which had been shattered, slowly began to rebuild itself, brick by brick, just like the building taking shape on my blueprints. News of the Croft contract spread quickly through the city's architectural circles. It was a seal of approval from the biggest player in town. The phone started ringing again. Old clients who had become distant suddenly called to check in. New clients, prestigious ones, started seeking me out. The cloud of suspicion that had hung over my name evaporated, burned away by the bright light of my new success. I hired a small team, 2 bright young interns who were eager to learn. My little firm, which had been on the brink of collapse, was now thriving. I was working harder than ever, but it was a joyful, fulfilling exhaustion, a world away from the soul-crushing fatigue of my old life. I maintained my strict no-contact rule with my parents and brother. Aunt Carol would give me occasional, brief updates. My father had become withdrawn and quiet. My mother was, in Carol's words, rattling around her big house like a ghost. Leo had taken a menial job in retail, the first real job he'd ever had in his life. The golden boy's shine had completely faded. One day, I received an official-looking envelope in the mail. It was an invitation to be a keynote speaker at a major regional architecture conference. They wanted me to speak about my work on the Croft project and the future of sustainable urban design. Standing on that stage a few weeks later, looking out at a sea of faces, peers, students, industry leaders, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. I spoke about buildings, about design, about creating spaces where people could feel safe and inspired. But underneath it all, I was telling my own story. A story about building a life on a solid foundation of truth and integrity, about tearing down a toxic structure to make way for something new and healthy. As the applause washed over me, I felt a sense of completion. I hadn't just saved my condo. I hadn't just saved my business. I had saved myself. I had found my own value, not in the reflection of my family's distorted mirror, but within myself. I no longer needed their approval. I was finally, truly free. The promotion I gave myself was one of self-worth, and it paid dividends no salary ever could. After the speech, as I was shaking hands and accepting congratulations, I saw them, standing near the back of the auditorium, looking hesitant and out of place. My parents. My first instinct was a jolt of the old anxiety, a fight-or-flight response ingrained from years of conditioning. But it faded as quickly as it came, replaced by a calm, detached curiosity. They looked different, smaller, older. The arrogant confidence that had always radiated from my mother was gone, replaced by a brittle uncertainty. My father just looked tired, his shoulders slumped in a permanent state of defeat. They waited until most of the crowd had dispersed before they approached me. It was my mother who spoke first, her voice soft, almost timid. "Peter, that was a wonderful speech. We're so proud of you." The words were so alien, so out of character, that I almost didn't know how to respond. Proud was a word they had almost exclusively reserved for Leo. "Thank you," I said, my tone polite but distant. There was an awkward silence. They were waiting for me to say more, to open a door for them. I didn't. I just waited. "We were wrong," my father finally mumbled, looking at his shoes. "About everything. What we did was wrong. We miss you," my mother added, her eyes welling up with tears. This time they looked real. "The family isn't the same without you. He's not doing well. We want to start over. We want our son back." There it was. The hook. The appeal to my old role as the family fixer. They weren't just apologizing. They were asking for something. They wanted me to come back and make everything right again, to restore the old order, perhaps with me in a slightly more respected position, but with the family unit still at the center of my universe. The old Peter would have caved. The old Peter, starved for affection and approval, would have seen those tears and heard those words as a lifeline. He would have mistaken control for love and desperation for remorse. But I wasn't the old Peter anymore. I had spent the last year building a life that didn't revolve around their needs, their drama, their approval. I had built a life on my own terms. I looked at my mother, at her tear-streaked face, and I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel pity. I just felt a sense of clarity. I finally understood the core difference between us. My goal had been to find peace. Hers had always been to maintain control. Her apology wasn't born from a true understanding of the pain she had caused, but from the discomfort of having lost her grip on me. I thought about all the therapy sessions I had started attending, learning about boundaries and narcissistic family systems. I thought about the peace and quiet of my condo, now truly my sanctuary. I thought about the joy I found in my work, unburdened by their expectations. I gave them a small, sad smile. Maybe, I said, the word hanging in the air between us. They both looked up, a flicker of hope in their eyes. I let them wait for it, then I delivered the final, crucial part of the sentence. Maybe, I repeated softly, when starting over isn't just about you losing control of me. The hope in their eyes died, replaced by a stunned confusion. They didn't understand, but I didn't need them to. It wasn't a negotiation. It was my declaration of independence, final and absolute. I knew who I was now. I was Peter Evans, and I was finally home. That night, I came back to my condo. The lights of the city twinkled outside my large living room window, a galaxy of possibilities. I walked through the quiet space, my footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floors. For 8 years, this place had been a source of pride, but also a source of anxiety, a gilded cage tied to my family's generosity. Now it felt different. It was truly mine in every sense of the word. Its foundation wasn't built on a lie or a hidden inheritance anymore. It was built on my own strength, my own resolve. I thought about my parents' faces in that auditorium. I realized that my final words to them weren't meant to be cruel. They were simply the truth. And perhaps somewhere down the line, if they ever truly understood what those words meant, there might be a path forward. A different, healthier relationship, built on respect instead of obligation. But I wasn't holding my breath. My happiness was no longer contingent on their growth. I had learned the hardest lesson of my life. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. That setting a boundary isn't an act of aggression, but an act of self-preservation. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. My whole life I had been the designated family torch, and now I was finally extinguished, cool and whole and mine again. The peace I felt was profound. It wasn't the giddy excitement of victory, but the deep, quiet contentment of a battle well fought and a war finally over. I had faced down my bullies, and I had won. Not by stooping to their level, but by rising above it with the unshakable power of the truth. My home was no longer just a collection of walls and furniture. It was a symbol of my independence, a sanctuary I had defended and reclaimed. And that was a foundation no one could ever shake again. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it touched you in some way. I hope it serves as a reminder that you have the right to protect your peace and your property, no matter who is trying to take it from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up to your own family to do what was right for you? It can be an incredibly lonely experience. I'd be honored if you shared a piece of your own story in the comments below. Let's create a community of support for each other. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps more than you know. Take care of yourselves.